Close your eyes for a second and try to hear it. Not the music, though the fuzz of a needle hitting vinyl is a good start. I want you to hear the silence of a Tuesday afternoon in 1974. There are no pings, no vibrations in your pocket, and no way for your parents to find you once you've pushed that heavy bike kickstand up and pedaled past the edge of the driveway. If you grew up in the 70s, your childhood wasn't just a collection of bell-bottoms and wood-paneled station wagons. It was perhaps the last great era of unsupervised human development. We often look back at that decade through a sepia-toned lens of nostalgia, laughing at the lead paint and the lack of seatbelts. But underneath the kitsch lies a fascinating psychological blueprint. You aren't just a product of your era. Your brain was literally wired by a unique set of social pressures, a specific kind of freedom, and a very particular brand of loneliness that modern psychology is only just beginning to fully unpack. Think about the sheer spatial freedom you had. You were a Latchkey kid before that term even became a national headline. You'd come home to an empty house, the air smelling slightly of stale cigarettes and crockpot stew, and you were the master of your own domain. Psychologically, this created a generation of little adults. While today we talk about helicopter parenting and the anxiety of constant supervision, the 70s child was the polar opposite. You were navigating the world with a high degree of self-reliance, which sounds empowering, and in many ways, it was. It built a rugged internal locus of control, the belief that you are the primary driver of your own life. But there's a flip side to that coin. When a child is given that much autonomy before their prefrontal cortex is ready to handle it, the brain compensates by developing a hypervigilance. You learned to read the room, to anticipate needs, and to solve problems because there simply wasn't anyone else around to do it for you. You became a functional expert at an age when you should have still been a beginner at being a human. This independence wasn't just about being alone. It was about the quality of the information you were consuming. Your window to the world was a heavy wooden television set that took 3 minutes to warm up, offering only 3 or 4 channels. There was a collective consciousness back then. Everyone saw the same news reports about Watergate, the energy crisis, and the Vietnam War. This created a strange psychological paradox. You felt like part of a massive shared cultural moment, yet you were physically more isolated than any teenager with a smartphone today. You had to wait. You waited for the bus, you waited for your favorite song to come on the radio so you could record it on a cassette, and you waited for your friends to show up at the park because you couldn't text them to see if they were running late. This forced patience did something remarkable to your neurobiology. It strengthened your delayed gratification circuits. In a world of now, the 70s child grew up in a world of eventually, which fostered a deep-seated resilience and a capacity for boredom that is almost a superpower in the modern age. But let's talk about the emotional landscape, because it wasn't all sunshine and bike rides. The 70s were a decade of massive social upheaval, particularly regarding the family unit. Divorce rates spiked, and the traditional home was being redefined in real time. For many of you, this meant witnessing the fallibility of adults much earlier than previous generations did. There was a certain cynicism by design that crept into your psyche. You saw the heroes of the previous generation falter, and you saw the institutions you were told to trust, government, marriage, the economy begin to crack. Psychologically, this often manifests as a guarded pragmatism. You're the person in the office who doesn't get swept up in the hype of a new project because you've seen how things can fall apart. You value honesty over polish, and you have a very low tolerance for what we might politely call fluff. You'd rather have the cold, hard truth than a comforting lie, because the truth is what you used to navigate your way through a world that felt a bit shaky. Consider the concept of free-range play and what it did for your social intelligence. Without a coach or a parent hovering nearby to referee every dispute on the playground, you had to learn the subtle art of negotiation. If you wanted the game of kickball to continue, you had to find a way to settle the argument about who was out. You couldn't run to an adult. You had to use your words, or your fists, or your sheer force of personality. This was a masterclass in peer-to-peer social dynamics. It taught you how to read body language and how to understand power structures without them being explained to you. It's why people born in this era often have such a get-it-done attitude. You don't need a manual. You just need a goal and a bit of room to move. However, this same environment could also be incredibly harsh. There was a tough-it-out mentality that dismissed emotional vulnerability as weakness. Go outside and play was often code for, don't bring your problems to me. This emotional stoicism is perhaps the most complex part of the 70s psychological legacy. You were raised by a generation that had survived the Depression or the war, people who prioritized survival and stability over emotional expression. As a result, many of you learned to compartmentalize your feelings. You became experts at performing okayness. If you were lonely or scared, you didn't have a vocabulary for it, so you buried it under a layer of self-sufficiency. This creates a fascinating dynamic in your adult relationships. You might find it hard to ask for help because, in your brain's oldest software, asking for help feels like a failure of independence. You are the rock for everyone else, the one who keeps it together when the wheels fall off. But you might secretly wonder who is going to be the rock for you. It's a heavy burden to carry, this idea that your value is tied to how little you need from others. Let's look at the sensory world you occupied. It was a tactile, analog existence. You felt the weight of a rotary phone receiver. You smelled the mimeograph paper at school. You navigated physical maps. Research suggests that this kind of multi-sensory physical interaction with the world builds a different kind of spatial memory and cognitive mapping than digital interaction does. You have a groundedness that comes from having to physically engage with your environment to get what you wanted. You couldn't just Google a fact. You had to go to the library and look at the Dewey Decimal System. This required a level of cognitive effort that we now outsource to algorithms. This effortful processing actually thickens certain neural pathways, giving you a type of mental grit. You are used to the friction of life. While younger generations might get frustrated when a website takes 3 seconds to load, you have the internal wiring to handle the long haul. But why does this matter now? Why should we care about how you felt in 1978? Because we are living in a world that is the antithesis of the one you were built for. We live in a hyper-connected, hyper-supervised, instant gratification society. For a 70s child, this can feel like living in a foreign country where you speak the language but don't understand the customs. You might feel a strange sense of displacement. You're tech-savvy because you had to learn it to survive, but you remember the before times. This gives you a unique perspective. A bilingual brain that understands both the analog and the digital, the lonely freedom and the crowded confinement. You are the bridge between two very different human experiences. I want you to realize that the hard edges of your personality, that skepticism, that fierce independence, that occasional emotional distance aren't flaws. They are scars from a time when those traits were your best tools for survival. You were a pioneer in a domestic wilderness. You learned to be your own parent, your own entertainer, and your own protector. That's an incredible feat of psychological adaptation. The challenge now is learning that it's okay to put the armor down sometimes. You don't have to be the latchkey kid anymore. You don't have to solve every problem in isolation. As you look back on those long summer evenings when the only rule was to be home by the time the streetlights came on, try to see that child not as someone who was neglected, but as someone who was given the gift of their own mind. You were allowed to wander, to fail, and to figure it out. That figuring it out is exactly who you are today. You are resilient because you had to be. You are practical because it worked. And you are deeply, quietly capable of handling things that would make others crumble. Your childhood wasn't just a decade, it was a forge. So, the next time you feel a bit out of sync with the modern world, or you feel that old urge to just handle it yourself, even when you're overwhelmed, take a breath. Recognize that your brain is just running the very successful software it was given 50 years ago. You've survived the transition from rotary phones to AI, and that's no small thing. You have a depth of perspective that is increasingly rare. What part of that 70s grit do you still find yourself leaning on today? And is there a part of that old self-sufficiency that you're finally ready to let go of? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What's the one thing from that era that you think the world needs more of right now? Maybe if we share those stories, we can bridge that gap between the quiet streets of the past and the noisy world of today. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the architecture of our past, perhaps you'd like me to explore the psychological impact of the 1980s next.